He thought he was planting evidence, but he was planting the end of his own career. The red and blue lights sliced through the quiet street, reflecting off rain-soaked asphalt like broken pieces of glass. And for a moment, everything felt still, like the city itself was holding its breath. Ava Brooks stood under a flickering streetlight, her posture calm, her expression unreadable, as if the tension in the air didn't belong to her at all. Across from her, Officer Ryan Carter stepped out of his patrol car with the kind of confidence that didn't come from truth, but from habit, from years of never being questioned. His boots hit the pavement with slow, deliberate steps, each one louder than it needed to be, like he wanted everyone watching to know exactly who was in control. And people were watching. A few bystanders lingered under awnings, others paused mid-step, their phones subtly raised, their curiosity outweighing their caution. Ryan's eyes locked onto Ava, scanning her, not for evidence, but for justification, for any reason that would make his next move feel deserved. "Evening," he said, his voice low, edged with something sharper than authority. Ava didn't respond right away. She simply looked at him, steady, composed, her silence stretching just long enough to make the moment uncomfortable. Imagine standing there, under those flashing lights, being judged before a single word leaves your mouth. Ryan took a step closer. "You mind telling me what you're doing out here?" he asked, though the question didn't sound like one. Ava's voice, when it came, was even. Walking. One word. Calm. Controlled. But it didn't matter. It was never about the answer. Ryan exhaled through his nose, glancing briefly at the small crowd beginning to gather. He could feel their attention, and it fueled him. "I'm gonna need you to cooperate," he said, already moving past the point of asking. His hand gestured toward her bag. "Set it down." Ava's fingers tightened slightly around the strap, not in fear, but in awareness. The rain picked up, a soft drizzle tapping against metal and glass, filling the silence between them. Still, she didn't argue. Slowly, she lowered the bag to the ground. Ryan crouched, unzipping it with exaggerated care, as if performing for an invisible audience. His movements were methodical, almost rehearsed. And then, there it was. A small package, wrapped tight, appearing in his hand like the answer he'd already decided on. He held it up just enough for others to see. A murmur rippled through the street. Ryan's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Well, look at that," he said, shaking his head as if disappointed, though his eyes told a different story. Ava didn't move, didn't react. Her gaze stayed fixed on him, unshaken, almost patient. The kind of patience that didn't come from helplessness, but from knowing something he didn't. The rain fell a little harder now, blurring the edges of the scene, softening everything except the tension. Ryan straightened, slipping into the role he knew so well. "You're in serious trouble," he said. And for the first time, Ava spoke again, her voice quiet, but carrying further than his. "Are you sure about that?" The question lingered in the air, heavier than it should have been, and for just a second, something shifted, something Ryan didn't notice yet, but everyone else could feel, like the moment before a storm finally breaks. Ryan did not answer her question right away, but something in the way she said it lingered, like a note that did not belong in the melody he was used to playing. He straightened his back, tightening his grip on the small package as if certainty could be reinforced by posture alone. Around them, the quiet hum of the street had shifted into something sharper, more attentive, the kind of silence that comes when people sense a story unfolding in real time. A car passed slowly, headlights washing over the scene before disappearing into the distance, leaving behind the flashing red and blue lights that painted everything in alternating shades of authority and doubt. "I am very sure," Ryan said finally, his voice louder now, projecting confidence for the crowd as much as for himself. "You were found in possession of illegal substances. That is not something you walk away from." He turned slightly, angling his body so that the onlookers could see the evidence in his hand, a subtle performance, a practiced move. A few whispers rose from the edges of the sidewalk. Someone lifted their phone higher. Someone else shook their head quietly, unsure of what they were witnessing but unable to look away. Ava's eyes followed the motion of the package, then returned to Ryan's face, steady, unwavering. She took a slow breath, the kind that centers rather than calms, and glanced briefly past him, not at the crowd, but at something further down the block, something unseen by everyone else. Then her gaze came back to him. You should take a moment, she said softly, and think about what happens next. Ryan let out a short laugh, dismissive, almost amused. What happens next, he replied, is you get placed under arrest, and we let the system handle the rest. The word system hung in the air, heavy with implication, heavier with assumption. Ava tilted her head slightly, as if considering that word, measuring it. The system, she repeated, almost to herself. For a second, the rain seemed louder, tapping against the pavement, against the hood of the patrol car, against the edges of everything that was about to change. Imagine knowing exactly how a story ends while everyone else is still caught in the beginning. Ryan reached toward his radio, his fingers brushing the button, preparing to call it in, to make it official, to lock the moment into place. But before he could press it, Ava spoke again, her voice cutting through the static before it even began. Before you do that, she said, her tone still calm, still controlled, you might want to check your surroundings. It was not a warning. It was not a threat. It was a statement. Ryan frowned slightly, just enough for the first crack to appear in the surface of his confidence. He glanced around, quick at first, then slower, noticing things he had not paid attention to before. A dark sedan parked half a block away, engine still running. A figure leaning casually against a lamppost, too still to be just another bystander. The subtle angle of a camera that was not held by a civilian hand. The air shifted again, this time unmistakably. The kind of shift that does not ask for permission. Ryan's jaw tightened as he looked back at Ava, searching her face for something he could still control, something that would bring the moment back into his grasp. But she had not moved. Not a step. Not an inch. Only her eyes had changed, no longer patient, no longer waiting, but certain. And for the first time since he stepped out of his car, Ryan Carter felt something unfamiliar press against his chest. Not fear, not yet, but the quiet. Realization that whatever story he thought he was writing had already been written without him. Ryan's fingers hovered near the radio, but he did not press it. Not yet, because something in the air no longer felt predictable, no longer felt like something he could control with a simple call and a report number. The rain continued to fall, steady now, soaking into his uniform, dampening the edges of his confidence in a way he could not quite explain. He glanced again toward the dark sedan down the block, this time holding his gaze a second longer, noticing the faint reflection of a figure inside, watching, waiting, not reacting like a passerby, but observing like someone who already knew how this would end. When he looked back at Ava, she had not moved, but the space between them felt different, heavier, like the balance had shifted without anyone announcing it. "What is this?" he asked, his voice no longer as smooth, a slight edge creeping in despite his effort to keep it steady. Ava did not answer immediately. She let the silence stretch again, the same silence that had unsettled him before, but now it carried weight, intention, something deliberate. Imagine realizing, piece by piece, that you are not the one in control, that every step you took was already anticipated before you even made it. Ava finally reached slowly into her jacket, not rushed, not defensive, every movement measured so that no one could mistake it for anything but certainty. Ryan's posture tightened instinctively, his training pulling him toward caution, but something deeper held him in place, something that told him to watch, to wait, because whatever was happening was already beyond the point of stopping. The crowd leaned in without stepping closer, phones raised, breaths held, as if the entire street had become a stage and no one wanted to miss the next line. Ava's hand emerged holding a small leather wallet, dark, unremarkable at first glance, the kind of thing that could pass unnoticed in any other moment. But this was not any other moment. She flipped it open with a quiet snap, turning it just enough for Ryan to see. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then everything did. The color drained from his face in a way he could not control, his eyes scanning the badge, the seal, the letters that spelled out. A reality he had not prepared for. Drug Enforcement Administration. Special Agent. Ava Brooks. The words did not shout, they did not need to. They settled into the space between them like a final verdict. The murmurs from the crowd stopped, replaced by a silence so complete it felt almost unnatural, like the city itself had paused to witness the moment. Ava closed the wallet slowly, her gaze never leaving his. "You said you were sure," she reminded him, her voice calm, not mocking, not angry, just certain. Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came out, his thoughts racing to catch up with a situation that had already moved past him. The package in his hand suddenly felt heavier, not as evidence, but as something else entirely, something that no longer supported his version of events. A car door opened somewhere behind him, the sound sharp against the quiet, followed by measured footsteps approaching, not rushed, not chaotic, but precise, controlled. Ryan did not turn immediately. He did not need to. He could feel it now, the presence, the shift from assumption to accountability. Ava took a small step forward, closing the distance just enough to make her next words land exactly where they needed to. "You should have taken that moment," she said softly, "because now it is too late." And in that instant, the story he thought he was telling collapsed completely, replaced by one where he was no longer the one holding the narrative, only the one standing in it. The footsteps behind him did not rush, did not echo with urgency, but carried a quiet authority that was far more unsettling, the kind that did not need to announce itself because it was already understood. Ryan finally turned, slowly, as if delaying the moment could somehow soften it, but it did not. Two figures approached from the direction of the dark sedan, their movements controlled, their expressions unreadable, their presence unmistakable. No flashing lights, no raised voices, just calm precision. The kind of presence that does not react, only acts. The crowd shifted slightly, instinctively creating space, phones still raised but now steadier, as if everyone sensed that what they were witnessing had moved beyond a simple street stop into something far more serious. Ryan's grip on the small package loosened just enough for it to no longer look like evidence, but like something he did not know where to place anymore. One of the agents stopped a few feet away, his eyes briefly meeting Ava's before returning to Ryan, a silent exchange passing between them that required no words. Ava gave a subtle nod, nothing dramatic, nothing performative, just confirmation. Everything was already in motion. "Officer Carter," the agent said, his voice even, professional, carrying the weight of procedure rather than emotion. Hearing his name spoken like that, without introduction, without hesitation, landed harder than anything else so far. Ryan blinked, once, then again, trying to gather something, anything that could restore control, but the moment had already moved past him. "What is this?" he asked again, but this time the question sounded different, less like a challenge and more like something searching for ground. Ava stepped slightly to the side, not retreating, but repositioning, allowing the scene to unfold exactly as it was meant to. "This," she said quietly, "is where the truth catches up." The second agent reached into his jacket and produced a small device, holding it up just enough to be seen, not as a threat, but as confirmation. "Everything from the moment you stepped out of your vehicle has been recorded," he said calmly. "Audio and video." The words settled heavily, each one removing another layer of certainty Ryan had built around himself. Imagine realizing that every word you chose, every move you made, was not just witnessed, but preserved, unable to be rewritten, unable to be explained away. Ryan's eyes flickered briefly toward the bystanders, their phones still raised, their presence now amplifying what he could no longer contain. The rain continued to fall, steady, almost indifferent, as if it had seen moments like this before and knew how they ended. "I was just doing my job," Ryan said, the sentence coming out automatically, a reflex more than a defense. But even as he said it, it sounded hollow, disconnected from the reality forming around him. Ava looked at him, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with something more final. "No," she replied, her voice steady. "You were choosing what kind of officer you wanted to be." The distinction hung in the air, undeniable. The first agent took a small step forward, not aggressive, not forceful, just enough to shift the balance completely. "We are going to need you to come with us," he said. No raised tone, no escalation, just inevitability. Ryan stood there for a second longer, the weight of the moment pressing in from every direction, the flashing lights behind him now feeling distant, almost irrelevant. The story he thought he controlled had not just slipped away, it had turned entirely, and now he was standing in the middle of it, exposed, unable to step out, unable to undo what had already been done. And for the first time, there was no performance left, no audience to convince, only the quiet, undeniable presence of truth closing in around him. Ryan did not move right away, not because he could not, but because something inside him had already stopped, as if the version of himself that had stepped out of that patrol car minutes ago no longer existed in this moment. The flashing lights behind him continued their rhythm, but they felt distant now, disconnected from the reality unfolding in front of him. The small crowd that had gathered no longer whispered as much as it watched, quietly, intently, as if everyone understood that what they were seeing was not just an incident, but a turning point. The agent's words still lingered in the air, calm and precise, leaving no room for interpretation. "We are going to need you to come with us." It was not a request. It was not a negotiation. It was a conclusion. Ryan swallowed, his throat dry despite the rain that had soaked through his uniform. His eyes shifted briefly to Ava, searching for something, an opening, a sign that this could still be redirected, explained, softened. But Ava's expression remained steady, composed, not cold, not warm, just certain. Imagine standing there, realizing that the moment you thought would define someone else has now become the moment that defines you. Slowly, Ryan lowered his hand, the package no longer held up as proof, but hanging at his side like something he wished he could let go of entirely. One of the agents stepped forward and gently took it from him, not forcefully, not aggressively, but with the quiet assurance of someone who already knew its place in the story. "We will take that," the agent said, his tone unchanged, professional, measured. Ryan did not resist. He did not argue. The energy that once fueled his certainty had drained away, replaced by something heavier, something harder to carry. Around them, the subtle glow of phone screens captured every angle, every expression, every second that could no longer be undone. Ava took a step back, giving space not out of retreat, but out of completion. Her role in this moment was no longer to endure, but to witness. The first agent gestured slightly toward the sedan down the block. "This way," he said. Again, no pressure, no urgency, just direction. Ryan hesitated for a fraction of a second, his feet still planted where they had been when he believed he was in control. Then, slowly, he turned, each step forward feeling heavier than the last, as if the ground itself had shifted beneath him. The distance to the sedan was not far, maybe 30 feet, but it felt longer, stretched by the weight of realization. The rain softened as he walked, the sound of it fading behind the quiet footsteps that now marked his path. Ava watched him go, her eyes following not with triumph, but with clarity. This was never about revenge. It was never about proving a point in the moment. It was about something deeper, something that did not need to be loud to be powerful. As Ryan reached the sedan, the door opened without a word, and he paused one last time, glancing back over his shoulder. For a brief second, his eyes met Ava's again, and in that look there was no longer authority, no longer certainty, only the quiet acknowledgement of a line that had been crossed and could not be uncrossed. Ava held his gaze, steady, unwavering, not as an opponent, but as the truth he had tried to ignore. Then the moment passed. The door closed. And just like that, the story shifted fully, leaving behind the echo of a lesson that did not need to be spoken out loud for everyone to understand. The sedan door closed with a soft, final sound, not loud, not dramatic, but heavy enough to echo in the minds of everyone still standing under the dim glow of the streetlights. The flashing lights from Ryan's patrol car continued behind them, but now they felt out of place, like a symbol that had lost its meaning in the presence of something greater. The crowd did not disperse immediately. No one rushed forward. No one spoke loudly. They simply stood there, absorbing what they had just witnessed, each person quietly, processing the shift that had taken place right in front of them. Ava remained where she was, her posture still composed, her breathing steady, as if the storm had passed through her without leaving a trace. One of the agents approached her again, his expression calm but respectful, the kind of look reserved for someone who had just completed something significant without needing recognition. "You handled that exactly as expected," he said, his voice low, measured. Ava gave a small nod, not in pride, but in acknowledgement. "He made his choices," she replied. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that extended far beyond the moment. The agent glanced briefly toward the sedan, then back at Ava. "This was not just him," he added quietly. "We have been tracking patterns, reports that never quite added up, incidents that seemed isolated until they were not." Ava's eyes shifted slightly, her focus sharpening, not surprised, but attentive. She had known this would go deeper. It always did. Imagine uncovering something that was never meant to be seen, realizing that one moment is only the surface of something much larger beneath it. Tonight was confirmation, the agent continued. Not the end. Ava exhaled slowly, the rain now fading into a light mist around them, the tension in the air transforming into something quieter, more deliberate. Then we keep going, she said. There was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty, only resolve. The agent nodded once, as if that answer had already been expected. Behind them, the subtle hum of the city began to return, distant traffic, footsteps resuming, the ordinary world slowly reclaiming its place around an extraordinary moment. A few of the bystanders began to lower their phones, their expressions no longer curious, but thoughtful, as if they had just witnessed something that would stay with them longer than they realized. Ava turned slightly, her gaze sweeping across the street, taking in the details she had noted from the beginning, the cameras, the angles, the small things that most people overlooked but that defined everything for her. This was never about one stop, never about one officer. It was about patterns, about systems, about the quiet ways power could be misused when no one was watching. But tonight, someone had been watching. Ava stepped forward, moving away from the center of the scene, not hurried, not lingering, simply transitioning into what came next. One of the agents opened the passenger door of the sedan for her, a small gesture that spoke to the structure of the world she operated in, one built on coordination, on preparation, on truth that did not need to raise its voice to be heard. Before she entered, Ava paused for just a second, her eyes lifting toward the now quiet street, the fading lights, the place where everything had shifted. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no sense of victory, only clarity. Because moments like this were not endings. They were beginnings. And as she stepped into the vehicle, the door closing softly behind her, the message left behind did not need to be spoken for it to be understood. The badge does not define the truth. The truth defines the badge. Inside the moving sedan, the world outside blurred into streaks of dim streetlights and fading reflections, the rain now reduced to a faint shimmer against the glass, as if the storm itself had stepped back to make room for what was unfolding next. Ava sat quietly in the passenger seat, her posture relaxed but her focus sharp, her eyes not on the passing streets but on the small tablet resting in her hands. The screen glowed softly, displaying timestamps, locations, fragments of reports that, when placed side by side, began to form a pattern too consistent to ignore. Across from her, one of the agents drove with steady precision, while the other sat in the back, reviewing notes, his expression focused, methodical. No one rushed. No one raised their voice. Because this was not chaos. This was structure. This was his third stop in the last 2 weeks with similar flags, the agent in the back said, breaking the silence just enough to move the conversation forward. Ava scrolled through the data, her fingers moving with quiet certainty. And each one dismissed, she replied, her tone even, but carrying an edge of understanding that came from experience, not assumption. The agent nodded. Body cam footage missing, reports inconsistent, no follow-up investigations. Ava paused for a moment, letting the information settle, not because it surprised her, but because it confirmed what she had already suspected long before tonight. Imagine seeing the same story repeated over and over, just with different names, different faces, until it no longer feels like coincidence, but design. He was not working alone, Ava said quietly. It was not a question. It was a conclusion. The driver glanced at her briefly through the rearview mirror. We believe there is a network, he said. Small, controlled, but consistent. Officers who know how to operate just under the threshold of attention. Ava leaned back slightly, her gaze returning to the screen, the lines of data now clearer, sharper, forming connections that had been invisible to anyone not looking closely enough. Tonight changed that, she said. The agent in the back closed his folder, the soft sound marking a shift in the conversation. Tonight gave us something solid, he agreed. Clear evidence. Public exposure. No way to bury it. Outside, the city continued to move, unaware of the quiet dismantling of something hidden beneath its surface. Street signs passed by, storefronts dimly lit, The ordinary world continuing as if nothing had happened, even though everything had. Ava tapped the screen once more, pulling up a list of names, addresses, connections that extended beyond a single officer, beyond a single department. Each name represented a thread. And tonight, one of those threads had finally been pulled. "We start with these," she said, turning the screen slightly so the others could see. The agent in the back leaned forward, studying the list, his expression tightening just enough to reflect the weight of what they were about to uncover. "This is bigger than we thought," he said. Ava nodded once. "It always is." The sedan slowed as it approached an intersection, the red light ahead casting a steady glow across the dashboard, illuminating the quiet determination in her eyes. There was no rush, no sense of urgency driven by panic, only the controlled momentum of something moving exactly as it needed to. Because the truth does not need to chase. It waits. It builds. And when it moves, it does so with precision. The light turned green. The car continued forward. And somewhere behind them, a moment that started as a simple stop had already begun to unravel something far greater than anyone on that street could have imagined. The sedan turned off the main road and onto a quieter street, where the city noise faded into a low hum and the buildings stood taller, darker, more reserved, like they were guarding what happened inside them. The vehicle slowed as it approached a secured federal facility, its exterior unremarkable to anyone passing by, but its presence unmistakable to those who understood what it represented. Ava closed the tablet in her hands, the soft click signaling a shift from analysis to action, from gathering truth to applying it. The gates ahead opened without hesitation, recognizing the vehicle before it even came to a full stop, a silent acknowledgement of authority that did not need to be questioned. Inside, the atmosphere was different, controlled, precise, every movement intentional, every person aware of their role. As Ava stepped out of the car, the cool night air carried a sense of clarity, sharper than before, like the moment had distilled everything down to what truly mattered. The agents moved with her, not surrounding, not leading, but aligned, a coordinated presence rather than a hierarchy. Inside the building, lights glowed bright against polished floors, screens flickered with data, and voices remained low, focused, never chaotic. Ava walked past workstations where analysts tracked patterns, cross-referenced reports, and connected fragments that most people would never see as part of the same story. Tonight, those fragments had a new anchor point. Her. "We have already started pulling the related cases," one analyst said as Ava approached, his eyes briefly meeting hers before returning to the screen. "Traffic stops, searches, missing footage, everything tied to Carter's unit." Ava nodded, her gaze scanning the data, recognizing the structure forming in real time. Names appeared, timestamps aligned, and inconsistencies that once seemed isolated now stood out clearly against the pattern. Imagine watching a puzzle solve itself, not because the pieces changed, but because someone finally knew how to see them. "Flag anything that repeats," Ava said, her voice calm but direct. "Same locations, same methods, same gaps in reporting." The analyst nodded quickly, already adjusting filters, narrowing the focus, sharpening the picture. Across the room, another agent approached, holding a folder that had been assembled faster than most people would think possible. "Internal Affairs is already being notified," he said, "but this stays with us until we are ready." Ava took the folder, flipping it open with the same measured precision she carried into every step of the process. Inside were reports that had been overlooked, statements that had been dismissed, details that had been buried under routine explanations. But now, they were no longer separate. They were evidence. He thought he was careful, the agent added quietly. Ava's eyes moved across the pages, her expression unchanged, but her focus intensifying. "Careful is not the same as invisible," she replied. The room continued to move around her, each person playing a role in something larger than any single case, each action contributing to a system designed to uncover what others tried to hide. Screens updated, files transferred, connections formed, and at the center of it, Ava stood not as someone reacting, but as someone directing the momentum forward. Because this was never about catching one moment. It was about exposing a pattern, a system, a truth that had been waiting for the right moment to surface. Ava closed the folder slowly, lifting her gaze to the room, to the people now working with a shared understanding of what had just begun. "We do this right," she said, her voice steady, carrying across the controlled noise of the room. "No shortcuts, no assumptions, just facts." The words settled in, not as a command, but as a standard. And as the operation moved forward, piece by piece, the reality became clear. What started on a quiet street under flashing lights was no longer just a moment. It was a turning point. And this time, the truth was not going to be ignored. The room did not slow down, but something in the air shifted as the pieces began to align, not with noise or celebration, but with quiet certainty, the kind that comes when a truth can no longer be denied or ignored. Ava stood at the center of it, not elevated, not separated, but grounded in the work itself, her presence steady as the system around her moved with increasing clarity. Screens continued to update, lines of data connecting names, locations, reports that once stood alone now forming a structure too consistent to dismiss. One by one, the gaps closed. One by one, the patterns became undeniable. Imagine watching something hidden finally come into focus, not because it suddenly appeared, but because someone refused to look away. An analyst looked up from his station, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that reflected the significance of what they were uncovering. "We have confirmations across 5 additional officers," he said. "Same behavior patterns, same reporting gaps, same locations." Ava nodded slightly, her eyes moving across the screens, absorbing the scale, not surprised, but resolved. "And the timeline?" she asked. Another agent stepped forward, tablet in hand. "Spanning over 18 months, he replied. "Escalating in frequency." The words settled into the room like a quiet realization, not of chaos, but of consistency, of something that had been allowed to continue because it had never been fully seen. Until now. Ava took a slow breath, her gaze lifting from the data to the people around her, each one now part of something larger than a single case, each one contributing to a shift that extended beyond this room. "Then we move forward," she said, her voice steady, clear, carrying through the controlled hum of the space. Every case, every report, every detail. There was no hesitation in her tone, no uncertainty, only direction. Across the room, confirmations followed, quiet acknowledgments, subtle nods, the kind that did not need to be loud to be understood. Because this was not about one moment on one street. It was about restoring something that had been slowly eroded, piece by piece. Outside, the first light of early morning began to touch the edges of the city, a faint glow breaking through the darkness, unnoticed by most, but present all the same. Time had moved forward, even as everything else had shifted. Ava stepped toward one of the windows, looking out at the skyline, the buildings standing still against the changing sky, a reminder that the world continues, even when something beneath it changes forever. Behind her, the work continued, files being compiled, reports being prepared, evidence secured, each action reinforcing what had already begun. She did not need to turn around to know it was happening. She could feel it, the weight of it, the direction of it. Because moments like this do not end when the scene fades. They echo, they expand, they become something that reaches further than anyone expects. Ava rested her hand lightly against the edge of the desk beside her, her reflection faint in the glass, her expression calm, but her eyes carrying the depth of everything that had unfolded. There was no triumph in them, no satisfaction, only purpose, because the truth does not celebrate. It stands, it remains, and it moves forward, whether people are ready for it or not. She turned back toward the room, toward the team, toward the work that was now fully in motion, and in that quiet shift, the story found its final shape, not in the moment of exposure, not in the fall of one officer, but in the rise of something stronger in its place. Something built not on assumption, not on power, but on truth. And as the city outside slowly woke to a new day, the message remained, steady and unshaken. He thought the badge gave him control, but in the end, it was the truth that decided who deserved to wear it.